Hypoxia is one of those aviation topics that sounds simple until you realize how dangerous it actually is. The scary part about it is that it can affect your judgment, reaction time, and vision before you even realize something is off. So in this video, we're going to break down hypoxia from the ACS, what causes it, how to recognize it, what the symptoms are, and what pilots should do about it. This is going to be a part of my ACS Human Factors series, and we're starting on hypoxia. Now, as always, why buy a course when you could just use the FAA source? So let's get right into it. Now, when I explain hypoxia, I like explaining hypoxia with an analogy here. And the analogy is we have a school bus picking up children for school. The school bus represents our blood, and the children represent oxygen. Okay? So for our first form of hypoxia, we're going to be talking about hypoxic hypoxia. So let's say the school bus comes to pick up the children, yet there are no children to be picked up. Well, this means there's not enough oxygen for the blood. Okay? And this can occur at higher altitudes, right? Because at sea level pressure, we have more oxygen molecules, right? Because we have a higher pressure. So I'm drawing just a bunch of dots here representing oxygen. As we go up in altitude, our pressure drops. So we're going to do altitude, going up, pressure drops, meaning our oxygen molecules are farther apart. Okay, and this is the main form of hypoxic hypoxia. Our next form of hypoxia is going to be hypemic hypoxia. Hypemic hypoxia is, say, the school bus never arrives. Okay, so we have oxygen, but there's nothing, the blood isn't there to transport it. Or we could say the bus is full of adults, right? This is pretty much signifying that the blood cannot carry oxygen effectively. Okay? Maybe think of some ways the blood can't carry the oxygen effectively. Well, a few ways can be carbon monoxide, right? Carbon monoxide binds to the blood roughly 200 to 250 times better than oxygen. Smoking can also cause hypemic hypoxia because it delivers carbon monoxide to your blood. And also, diseases like anemia. I want you to think of this as a pilot. If you yourself smoke, or you have passengers that smoke as well, know the risks that it can cause hypemic hypoxia. Smoking before a flight can still bind carbon monoxide to your blood, and if you're going to higher altitudes, you can get hypemic hypoxia. So for our next form of hypoxia, it is known as histotoxic hypoxia. Histotoxic hypoxia, how I explain it, is the children board the bus and the bus drives the children to school. But when the children arrive to school, the doors are locked. So the oxygen makes its way into the blood flows throughout the body, transporting it to the cells, but the cells don't want it. Now, the cells are preoccupied by either alcohol, drugs, or another form of toxins. Think of this as your buddy who may have drank too much and you're trying to give them some water. But every time you give them a cup of water, they just throw it across the room. This is the best way to think of histotoxic hypoxia. Hypoxia caused by alcohol, drugs, or toxins. Also, people aboard airplanes need less alcohol to get intoxicated. This is due to their cells being occupied with toxins or alcohol or drugs and less oxygen making its way into their cells. Our last form of hypoxia is going to be stagnant hypoxia. Stagnant hypoxia, the oxygen may make it to the blood, right? So the students board the bus, but the bus breaks down and can't move. So the blood isn't moving. Now, what can cause this? Well, G-forces can cause this, right? You're pulling lots of G's, you're stuck to your seat, you can't move. Well, your blood is doing the same thing. Another is poor circulation. This can be caused by a seatbelt, and also if you're too cold, right? If you're hypothermic, because if you're hypothermic, your blood is moving a lot slower. Now, we've talked about the 4 different types of hypoxia and how they occur. But what about the symptoms that take place with those types of hypoxia? Well, there's a plethora of symptoms, and they differ per person. Everybody is different. And it doesn't matter your age or your physiological capabilities, it's everybody. So, the first and most common would be headache. Even a minor headache, just feeling like your headset's on a little too tight, could be an indicator of hypoxia. Another is dizziness, okay? Feeling just maybe some nausea. Cyanosis is also a symptom of hypoxia, and cyanosis is when your lips or fingertips start turning blue. We also have tunnel vision, okay? Tingling lips and fingers. A sense of euphoria, feeling great, okay? Also having some poor judgment as well. A slowed reaction time, maybe encountering some overconfidence. And lastly, task fixation. You may have a different symptom that I didn't list here, but these are some of the most common hypoxia symptoms. Someone may not even experience a headache. They may just experience euphoria and tingling lips and fingers. So it's important to know what your hypoxia symptoms are. We can do this through the FAA's PROT system. This is the Portable Reduced Oxygen Training Enclosure, and this simulates altitude-related oxygen deprivation at ground level in a controlled environment. And you can see these at Oshkosh or Sun and Fun, big events like that, or even the Aeronautical Center in Oklahoma City. So we've gone over the symptom. Let's go over the regulations that play a role with hypoxia. So the FAA has a FAR 91-211, which goes in depth on when we need to use supplemental oxygen. So below 12,500 feet MSL, we do not legally need to carry supplemental oxygen. Now, if we fly above 12,500 feet MSL for 30 minutes, we do need supplemental oxygen, and that's up to and including 14,000 feet. Now, let's say we're flying at 12,400 feet and we want to climb up to 12,700 feet. Well, we can climb up there, and let's say we only stay up there for 15 minutes. And then we decide to go back down to 12,400 feet. And now we need to climb back up. Let's say there's some clouds or terrain that we need to climb up for another 15 minutes. Are we required supplemental oxygen? And actually, we are. The timer starts the moment we go above 12,500 feet, and it doesn't reset until we have completed that flight. Now, let's say we want to fly above 14,000 feet MSL, and we're going to only be between 12,500 and 14,000 feet MSL for roughly 10 minutes. Well, at 14,000 feet, all flight crew members are required to wear supplemental oxygen. Okay? No ifs, ands, or buts. You must wear supplemental oxygen above 14,000 feet, so 14,001 foot MSL. Now, if we keep climbing up to 15,000 feet MSL and above, everybody on that plane must be provided supplemental oxygen. Now, the FAA has actually given us a very useful and interesting chart, and this is the time of useful consciousness chart. Now, we can see at 20,000 feet MSL, we can be conscious for 30 minutes or more. But as we go up in altitude, like 22,000 feet MSL, it drops practically by 2/3. And as we keep going up, it drops by half. And this is why airline pilots are trained to quickly don a quick donning oxygen mask, because they have less than up to 15 seconds sometime to react to a quick decompression. Now, what are the best ways to prevent hypoxia? Well, the first is to use supplemental oxygen early. As you can see here, I added a FAA hypoxia brochure. It'll be in the description for you. But at the bottom left-hand corner, I have it highlighted, the FAA recommends using supplemental oxygen above 10,000 feet MSL and at night at 6,000 feet MSL. Now, this is a good brochure to read because 91.211 says above 12,500 MSL for more than 30 minutes you have to use supplemental oxygen, but that doesn't mean we can't use it before reaching 12,500 feet. Now, the other best way to prevent hypoxia is to avoid smoking. I'm also going to put the brochure up here because there's another interesting story. Now, there's a story of a pilot in the western states that was cruising at 13,500 feet MSL over mountainous terrain, and he took one drag of his cigarette, and then the next thing he remembered was being in a dive and pulling out of it. This is a perfect example of hypemic hypoxia in the flesh. This is why it's important for us as pilots and our passengers to avoid smoking during flight and before flight. Now, there's a plethora of reasons why we shouldn't use alcohol before flights or during flights, of course. Now, I'm going to go in the before flights, right? If we wake up hungover and we go flying, well, we're not going to be physically well, right? We're going to feel sick, groggy, so on and so forth. Depends on how a hangover affects you. And this can lead us to not know when we're becoming hypoxic. The other is if we show up to a flight a little bit intoxicated, or more likely a passenger does, and we're flying at higher altitudes, it raises the risk of histotoxic hypoxia within the individual. Now, we should also avoid flying while ill because we may miss what is a hypoxic symptom just due to being ill, right? If we've experienced headaches on the ground, then we may just think a headache at 12,400 feet is just us being sick. Also, for taking medication before the flight, then that could also raise our risk for histotoxic hypoxia. Now, we also want to ensure that we are well rested, hydrated, and have eaten a full meal, and we're keeping up with the hydration during flight. And the reason for this is if we're not physiologically 100%, then it's going to be harder for us to notice our hypoxic symptoms. Now, we should use a pulse oximeter at or above 10,000 feet MSL, and we should regularly be checking our oxygen every 10 to 15 minutes while flying. Now, what we want is 90% or above our oxygen saturation. Anything below that, we're going to want to use supplemental oxygen because that's when hypoxic symptoms could start affecting us. Now, what do we do if we suspect we have hypoxia? Firstly is going to be descend and to use supplemental oxygen. We can also open our air vents and, of course, declare an emergency with air traffic control to let them know what's going on. So the big takeaway here is to not wait until you feel hypoxic before you do something about it. One of the most dangerous parts of hypoxia is that your judgment can start degrading before you even realize you're impaired. That's why us as pilots, we need to set personal oxygen minimums before every flight, especially for flying at higher altitudes, at night, over mountainous terrains, or when we're already fatigued. And yes, the regulations give us a legal requirement, but those are also minimums. They're not always the smartest standards to use. A safe pilot should be thinking beyond just what the legal interpretation is asking. Should be thinking, what gives me the best margin of safety? I want to thank you all for watching, and I want you to remember that hypoxia is a topic within the ACS, so there is a possibility that you can be asked this on your check ride. As always, I will leave my sources in the description below that are not in the video. And I just want to remind you all to subscribe if you enjoyed the video, because I will be releasing another Human Factors video. This one's going to be on hyperventilation here in the near future. And if you have any feedback, questions, comments, or concerns, make sure to comment them below, as I will read them all and respond. Thank you.